My name is Martin Madert with the Witness to War Foundation. It's November 3rd, 2019, and we are in Seattle, Washington for the United States Marine Corps Vietnam Tankers Association reunion. Sir, if you would not mind saying your name and spelling it for me.
My name is Roger Bruce Luli, Rogerbuli.
And when were you in the Marine Corps, and more specifically, what year were you in Vietnam?
I joined in 1966 and got out in 1971. My years in Vietnam were from August of 67 to September of 1968.
And what unit did you serve with in Vietnam?
I served with two. I served with Charlie Company, 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion for the first 3 months, and then they actually decommissioned the battalion, and so I was transferred to Bravo Company, 3rd Tank Battalion.
Terrific. So tell me about an experience in Vietnam that is memorable for you.
Oh my goodness. I guess arriving there was memorable. They didn't have a place to tell us where we were assigned, so we just had to sleep the first night. Well, there was no sleep. We were at the Da Nang airport with jets taking off all night long. So the next morning, I got assigned to come up to 3rd Tank Battalion and met Colonel Jinx McCain, who was the guy that got me interested in tanks in the first place. So reunited with him, and he gave me the bad news that we don't need any tank officers, but I got this other vehicle you might like to try. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, it's called an Ontos, and it's a tracked vehicle. And then he showed me where I was going to be stationed, and it was at Con Thien. And I looked at the map, and it was only like 3,000 meters from the demilitarized zone. So I said, okay. I found out later that a lot of the officers I went through tank school with did not get platoons. They got administrative jobs. They were in the rear somewhere. So even though I was disappointed, I was happy I got the combat assignment.
Before we get too into it, tell me about some of the men on the Ontos.
There are 3 crewmen. You've got a driver, a loader, and the commander. And the Ontos had 6 106 recoilless rifles. The commander could fire them 1 at a time, 2 at a time, or all 6 at the same time. Tremendous amount of firepower, tremendous amount of concussion, but the vehicle was recoilless, so the vehicle wasn't affected by the concussion. There was no place for the platoon commander, though, so I had a driver and a personnel carrier. So I would ride around in a truck along with the Ontos. But by that time, they found that the Ontos really wasn't good for convoy escort or operations because of the backblast. And so what they had done at that point, we were set up in 4 positions at Con Thien in defensive positions, where the backblast was going to go somewhere that wouldn't hurt anybody. Met the gunnery sergeant, Gunny Cahoon, and he gave me a tour of the positions at Con Thien. I remember it was very dusty and dry and obviously dirty. The dust just stuck to you when you sweat. And so we looked around at the positions. We had 2 rear gates and 2 in front of an observation post. So the observation post was way up behind us where the backblast wouldn't get them, and we would fire over the defensive perimeter. Guys I remember from there were Corporal Hengy, who was the driver. The radio operator name was Pete, and I met the little police chief in Kamlo who loved him, and she called him Feet. Where's Feet? Where's Feet? Let's see, what else was memorable there? Some of the events that stick in my mind was that one of the Ontos was hit by shrapnel, and the shrapnel destroyed one of the 106 rifles. And if you recall, David Douglas Duncan came up there and took pictures. Well, there's a picture of the replacement rifle being offloaded from the helicopter for the Ontos. So in Life magazine. I wasn't, but the rifle was. More stuff. We would.
What sort of vulnerabilities did the Ontos have?
Oh, just about it. Mines and RPGs. It didn't have real thick armor like the tank. It would stop a 30 caliber round, but not a 50. So it was real thin armor. It was supposed to be a lightweight reconnaissance vehicle. or run in, shoot your weapons, run away, reload, run back in, and shoot your weapons again. We're supposed to there and slug it out with tanks. Trying to think. We watched the DMZ, the trace. We call it McNamara's Wall, and we would watch. We called it Puff. It was an aircraft that had miniguns, and they would drop flares till they found the enemy trying to sneak across, and then it was like a ray gun that would come down, and that was very impressive. I remember the New Jersey was firing in support of some infantry to the west of us, and we could almost see the big shell coming from the New Jersey, just like a railroad car going through the air. We took a lot of incoming one day. I think one of the drivers was going out to look at the vehicle, and he came running in, "Lieutenant, I see an anti-aircraft gun in the DMZ." Well, it turns out it was a rocket launcher, and he was seeing the rockets go up. And I started to go out to look and heard them coming. And it was reported that we took over 1,000 rounds of incoming and hits that day on the hill. So the thing that probably saved a lot of people was that it had started raining. Shortly after I got it started raining, and all that dust turned to mud. And the rocket would hit and bury itself before it went off. And that saved a lot of people. Yeah, so much.
Do you have any other close calls?
Well, it was a close call almost every day. It was interesting. You'd hear the first rocket come in the morning, and you put on your boots, put on your helmet, light a cigarette, first of many cigarettes, and just keep them going for the rest of the day. Because, we would run between locations. We had to go to battalion briefings and so forth. We would run between locations, keeping your ears open for anything that might come, and always being aware where you could find cover on your trail to where you were headed. When the rains came, it not only turned the place into mud, but also washed out a bridge below where we were. So sea rations that we didn't think were quite edible before suddenly became edible. We didn't get resupply. It was kind of a rough time. What else? A lot of, not only incoming, but we had a lot of outgoing rounds. We had an artillery battery there. And when we would take fire coming in, we'd obviously return fire. So a lot of outgoing. Used to make us a little bit upset that the newspapers would say the Marines are taking a pounding in their bunkers, taking a pounding. We weren't in our bunkers. We were looking to see where the enemy was firing from.
As I understand it, they had a bunch of bunkers out there too, right?
They did, and you destroy one, and overnight they'd build it again. They were night workers. They were used to doing everything by hand, manual labor, and they were hard workers. Very smart.
Bunkers for someone who's never seen them.
Well, it would usually be like logs, and they didn't use sandbags. They just piled dirt up on it. You wouldn't haul around sand and dirt. You just find it where it is and then put it on the bunker, and it protected in the front and camouflaged so you couldn't see it. They would one night they set up a machine gun, and I think it was remotely controlled because it wasn't hitting anything. It was just firing over the tops of our heads, these green tracers from their machine gun. And the colonel finally said, they're just trying to find out where you are. So after that, when it happened, he said, fire to the sides. That's where the spotters are. That's where the guys are that are looking to see where you are when you fire back at the machine gun. So that was pretty effective. Sad note, got to know Corporal pretty well. Herman John Bear, we called him Bear. He and I were sitting on the side of the bunker talking, and the round came in, and we both dove for an opening. And the blast went off. I felt the heat from the blast and crumpled down into the bunker. And then somebody says, "Where's Bear?" And when we went back out, he had been badly wounded, hit in the forehead, and top of his skull had blown off, and he was struggling. And so we bandaged him, called for a corpsman. The corpsman came up and didn't have a stretcher, so we put him on a cot and took him down to the aid station. I stayed with him, sent the other guys that were carrying him back, and the doctor finally stepped back and said, "I can't do anything more for him." And I said, well, is he in pain? He says, well, right, he's fighting for his life right now. So they put him on the helicopter, and I found out later that he had passed away, that didn't survive that. So,
How did that affect you at the time?
the whole platoon was devastated. He was very popular, very outgoing, popular guy, and he was short. He only had a few more weeks to go in country, so it was rough. And I had to become more of a disciplinarian than I had been before because he didn't have a helmet on, and neither did I at the time. And from then on, the men all wore their helmets and their flak jackets.
Could you tell me a good story about Bear? One of your good memories of him?
Oh, he considered himself the Minnesota stud. He said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to repopulate the state of Minnesota. He was funny. He was funny. And he had a different accent. It was almost Southern, but he was from the North. Good guy. Knew about the Ontos. Was a good crewman. Man, I missed him. He was replaced by another new guy, and I don't recall his name because it was shortly after that we'd taken off Con Thien. The colonel of 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, said, how long have you been up here with your crew? And I said, about 45, 48 days, something like that. And he says, you've been here too long because you didn't want to stay in a place like that long. So they would rotate us out. So another platoon replaced us, and we went back for a little bit of R&R at Dong Ha. Then they put 2 Ontos up at a place called Yali, which on the other end of the trace, the other end of the McNamara's wall. And my platoon sergeant and I would take turns, a couple of weeks up at Yali and a couple of weeks back at Dong Ha. Yali was better. They were in the scope of a direct fire weapon, and so they had dug trenches. So you didn't have to run around in the open. And if you heard the gun, it was too late to duck. Anyway, it was almost instantaneous. They had a mess hall where we got hot food twice a day and then sea rations for our 3rd meal. And it was a much better place. And then getting it to go back to the rear every couple of weeks, take a hot shower, be in a nice cot, that was nice too. The evacuation of the Ontos happened in November. We brought all the vehicles back to Dong Ha, put them on a landing craft, and we sailed out the Qua Viet River, and we were headed for Hue City. When we got to the end of the Qua Viet River, the boat hit a wave and went way up in the air, the bow went up in the air, and then it went down below the water line, filled the bow with water. And I thought, well, that's probably what the Navy does. And I looked back in the eyes of the Navy crew, they were like big. I thought, maybe we just dodged a bullet here. But the rest of the trip was uneventful. We went down into Hue City, tied up, got the vehicles off, and spent the night there. And Hue was absolutely gorgeous, beautiful city. The people, the women that were the Audais. I wrote a story about it. I said we learned that women can be sexy dressed from their neck to their ankles in silk. Of course, we just come from the bush where we didn't see any women, but still, it was amazing. Drove down to Phu Bai, cleaned up the vehicles, and disbanded. I was then assigned to the tank battalion and came north. Interesting thing, while we were cleaning our vehicles and weapons, I put my 45, took it apart, put it in a bucket of diesel fuel, and it was filled with sand. When that wave came over, it had sand in it. And it's a good thing I didn't need that 45 on the way down, because it wouldn't have worked. And Colonel McCain, true to his promise, got me back to tanks, got me a tank platoon with Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, and went up, met the company commander, was Captain Dan Kent, and Mo White was the top sergeant. Spent some time there, and then got on a Jeep and drove out to 2nd Platoon, which was at the rock pile. And there I met Gunnery Sergeant Dan Rocco and my crew. And I can remember most of the names of the crew. A couple of them, it got kind of fuzzy. With the rotation, in and out. One guy was just with me a couple of weeks, and I can't remember his name. I just remember his dedication. He was from Chicago, and he was short, and I said, you know, after my experience with Bear, I said, you're short, you don't have to go on the convoy escort this time. And he said, Lieutenant, if my boys are going down the road, I'm going down the road. And he did, he went. So that, I remember that. At Rock Powell, we did mine sweep in the morning, got up and swept the mine back to Camp Carroll and then down to a place called Kaloo. And then later we would pick up a convoy and escort the convoy through our area of responsibility. And about every 3 weeks we could count on being ambushed. So Gunny, Rocco, and I decided we're going to alternate leading the convoy down. A little bit of a break. Did have something funny. The one ambush, I heard over the radio traffic what was going on, and the colonel criticized the decision of the company commander, and the company commander said, I'm down here, Colonel, and you're back there in your bunker. Next thing you know, I get the telephone rings, and it's the colonel saying, I need a ride. So he came, and or I went and picked him up, and he crawled in the loader's hatch and sort of settled himself behind the breech of the tank. I said, excuse me, Colonel, but you don't want to stand there. That's where the gun goes when we fire it. So he crawled in. And we took him down, and he was able to get out and help make this ambush go away, basically. We had a good time at the rock pile. We had a lot less incoming than we had at Con Thien and Yali. We had a mess hall, so we had hot food and some sea rations. I've got a great Christmas picture of Gunny Rocco having his Christmas dinner. It's a can of turkey, pressed turkey. That was good. My, what other memories? Go ahead.
Tell me about coming home.
Oh my, coming home. I got orders to come back, report back to Camp Carroll. And while I was there, they got a call they needed a reaction force of 2 tanks down at Cam Low. So I said, I'll take it down. And my driver, the guy who'd been my driver for almost the whole time, was Wally Young. He said, don't go, don't go. He was begging me not to go. And I said, you know, I've got to go. I'm the only officer available. So I went down there and spent the night in Cam Low, and no events. They saw the tanks come in and decided to maybe not hit the city. Moved on down to the battalion headquarters and spent a couple days down there, debriefing, turning in my weapon, packing, getting ready to go home, and the monsoon came in. And so I was caught in a tent. I was asleep, and I felt something crawl across my legs. And I got up like this, and the water was up to the bottom of the cot. I said, I can't stay here. So I grabbed my gear, ran up the hill to another tent, and found a dry blanket and slept. And when I looked at the tent the next morning, all you could see was the ridgepole. The top of it was underwater. The whole tent was underwater. We were camped in the middle of an intermittent lake, it said on the map. So when the monsoon comes in, it filled up the lake. Went down to Da Nang, spent some time at the Air Force BOQ, not the BOQ, they had a club, Gunfighters Club they called it. They had really good food. And then they flew us to Okinawa, and we spent 4 days in Okinawa kind of decompressing, sitting around talking and getting cleaned up, trying to get the bad language out before we got home to Mom. And picked up our gear and got on a plane, spent 2 hours in the Honolulu airport on the way in. And when the plane landed, and we were landed at LAX, no, we landed at, I think, Norton Air Force Base. And there was a cheer. Everybody cheered when that happened. They got us to LAX, and I got on a plane and came home. A little disappointed. A guy I met on the plane said, I'll give you a ride from Columbus, but he wouldn't take me another 15 miles to my hometown. He dropped me off in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, and I had to call my parents to come pick me up. So they were happy to do it, I guess. I hope they were happy to do it.
So what do you want people to remember about the Vietnam War based on your experiences?
I want them to remember that at the time the country was very divided. A lot of people did not want that war, felt it was wrong. There are a lot of books come out and talk about how we were lied to, shouldn't have been there. I want them to remember there are a lot of U.S. citizens now who have come from Vietnam, and they wouldn't be here and probably wouldn't be alive if it hadn't been for the U.S. involvement in that country. And I think the people there learned about capitalism while we were there. It's a communist country, but it's also a capitalist country, and their economy there is fantastic. I don't know if I want to go back and see where I was, because I think they changed it all. Might bring back memories I don't want to have, but I think that country is better off, even with communist rule. They're better off than they were. So.
And lastly, any final thoughts, words of advice, closing statements for anybody watching this in the future?
Be careful what you grab onto. When I went in, I'd failed my draft physical. When I went in, I just got talking to a beautiful blonde woman Marine, and she convinced me how to go in, and I did. So be careful what you sign up for.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your stories with me today. It's really an honor.
Well,
And
thank you
more
for having me here.
Thanks for your service. It's greatly appreciated.
Okay.
Sir.